Power looks really different when you strip off the name tags and the titles and the fancy little badges. That was the first thing running through my head while my SWAT team moved through the glass office of the Cedar Crest Reserve. Homeowners Association boots thudding on polished floors. Evidence boxes landing on a conference table where people used to argue about mailbox colors and shade codes for beige. And at the far end of the room, right next to a paper shredder that had just been yanked out of the wall, sat the woman who started all of it, fingers still resting on a stack of violation notices. She was about 2 seconds too late to destroy. Jaw-tight eyes darting around like maybe there was still a rule she could quote that would make this whole scene go away. I walked up to her vest, still dusty from the mountain road warrant in one hand, years of being looked down on, sitting heavy in my chest, and I said, calm as I could, "You remember my cabin up on High Ridge Trail? Cheryl, the one you decided was under your visual jurisdiction, and the yard where you pointed a gun at my best friend and pulled the trigger on my land. And you could feel the whole room shift, board members who had been sitting tall in their leather chairs, suddenly sliding away from her like guilt might be contagious. Before I tell you how we got from a woodpile at my cabin to me standing in their office while my team tagged their files, as evidence, do me a favor and drop in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever had a neighbor or an HOA or a boss push their tiny bit of power way past the line. Because if you have, you're about to recognize a lot of what happened next. You know what I mean. My name's Ethan Cole. I run a tactical team with the Redwood County Sheriff's Office on paper that sounds like the kind of job people respect. But in my head, I am still that kid from the trailer. At the end of Willow Street, the one teachers watched a little too closely. The one parents pulled their kids away from at the playground. The one everybody just sort of assumed would be in the back of a patrol car someday, instead of using the keys. And when you grow up like that, when every rule is always applied a little bit harder to you, you get real sensitive to people who enjoy having power over others, especially when they start hiding behind words like standards and values and association guidelines. And the cabin was supposed to be my way out of all that noise. 10 acres of pines at the top of a ridge, an A-frame that creaks when the wind picks up a deck where you hear owls instead of traffic. And the loudest argument is between the squirrels and the blue jays. And when the realtor told me, there is an HOA down in the valley, Cedar Crest Reserve, but this parcel is fully outside their boundary, I didn't just nod, I made her pull up the county map. Then I took a picture of it on my phone. Then I had the county email me a copy, because I promised myself a long time ago I was never again going to live under a committee that could tell me what I was allowed to have in my own yard. From the deck, you can see Cedar Crest down below. The cul-de-sacs look like they were drawn with a ruler. Lawns so perfect, they almost feel fake. Matching mailboxes. Little solar lights lined up like runways. And I would sit up there on a Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and think, good for them. I guess that's their world. And this is mine. Because their bylaws stop where my property line starts, right? That's how it's supposed to work. The first hint that they didn't really believe that came as a laminated sign zip-tied to a pine tree at the edge of my driveway. Bright plastic flapping in the wind like a little warning flag. Notice unapproved structures visible from Cedar Crest may be subject to review. Contact HOA office. And I remember laughing, shaking my head, ripping it off the tree and tossing it straight into the trash, telling the woods, you don't own my view, and going on with my day, not realizing that to some people visible was just a magic word they thought could stretch their control uphill as far as their eyes could see. A few weeks later, it was one of those crisp mountain mornings, cool enough that you see your breath sun. just starting to slip through the branches, offie steaming in my hand. My buddy Jason Miller, out in the yard, stacking firewood like some kind of lumber Tetris. And for once, there was no radio on my hip, no pager going off, just the simple sound of logs bumping together and the creak of the cabin settling. And I remember thinking, this right here, this is why I bought this place. You know that rare feeling where your brain finally shuts up. Then someone started pounding on the door. Not a polite knock, not even an annoyed knock. It was the kind of flat, angry open palm hitting wood that says, "I think I own whatever's on the other side of this," followed by a sharp voice yelling, "Open up! This is official HOA business." And I actually looked around my own living room, like maybe I'd misread the deed, like maybe the cabin had stood up overnight and walked itself down into Cedar Crest, because what on earth was an HOA doing at my front door on a trail they didn't pay to plow? I opened it, and there she was. Mid-50s blonde bob, so stiff it looked like it had its own helmet rating big sunglasses, even though the sun was barely up. Beige blazer, shiny badge on a lanyard that said, Cedar Crest Reserve. President. Clipboard tucked under one arm, like a shield phone already in her hand. And she didn't wait for an invitation. She just brushed past me into my cabin, with that tone people get when they've decided you're already guilty of something. "You really shouldn't take so long to answer when the association is at your door," she said, like I was late for a performance review. "Good morning to you too," I answered, trying to keep it light. "I'm Ethan." "And you would be?" She lifted her chin a little. "Cheryl Banks, president of the Cedar Crest Reserve Homeowners Association," she said, like she was dropping the name of a federal agency. "Your property is in violation of multiple community standards." She didn't ask to see my deed. Didn't ask if I was part of her community. She just marched straight to the front window, pointed her pen like a laser pointer, and started presenting. "Unregistered outbuilding," she said, stabbing the air in the direction of my old shed. "Improper storage of materials, visible to adjacent residents." Now she was pointing at the neatly stacked pile of logs. Then, with this little sniff of disgust, "and unauthorized labor activity bordering HOA-controlled land." Which in plain English meant Jason standing there, in a flannel holding a piece of firewood, like the world's least threatening weapon. I walked up beside her, looked out the same window and said as evenly as I could, "You mean my friend stacking my firewood on my property?" And in my head, I could already feel that old familiar heat of the one you get when someone in nicer clothes decides you're a problem they need to manage. "If we can see it, we can regulate it," she shot back, actually saying those words like they were gospel. That's how this community works. Anything visible from Cedar Crest affects our property values, and that makes it our concern. I took a slow breath, looked her right in the sunglasses and said, "Your community stops at your property line, and this parcel is not in your HOA. I verified it with the county before I signed anything, so whatever handbook you're quoting doesn't apply up here." She scribbled something on her clipboard, like my words were just background noise, tore off a sheet with dramatic flair, and shoved it against my chest. "Effective immediately," she said. "You are subject to a $500 daily fine until these violations are corrected. That includes removal of that shed concealment of those materials and cessation of non-approved work." And I looked down at the paper and saw my last name spelled wrong. No parcel number, no county seal. Just some made-up visual jurisdiction zone she'd basically drawn around my hill. And it would have been funny if I hadn't spent my whole life having people like her assumed they could talk to me like that. Old Ethan might have swallowed it to avoid drama, but I'm too old and too tired for that now. So I handed the paper back and said, "Cheryl, I'm not part of your HOA. You have no authority up here. If you think you do, call the county assessor and ask them whose land this is. But you are not going to slap random fines on me because you don't like where I stack my wood." Her cheeks went blotchy. She tightened her grip on the clipboard, and I saw the shift that moment where it stopped being about rules and started being about ego. "If you think you can hide behind technicalities, you are very mistaken," she snapped. "We take non-compliance extremely seriously in Cedar Crest." And before I could answer, she pulled out her phone, spun on her heel toward the door and said, "Fine, we'll let law enforcement sort this out." I followed her onto the porch just in time to hear her tell 911. In this shaky little victim voice I didn't recognize from 30 seconds ago. "Yes, I'm near Cedar Crest Reserve. There are 2 aggressive men doing illegal construction in a restricted area they're refusing to leave. I'm afraid for my safety." And my stomach just dropped. "Cheryl, hang up the phone." I said, that edge creeping into my voice. "You're standing on my porch. No one has touched you. Lying to dispatch is a crime." But she put a hand over the mic like I was being rude. Ended the call and said, "People who follow the rules don't mind answering a few questions. If you aren't doing anything wrong, you have nothing to fear." Out in the yard, Jason called, "Everything good up there, man?" Still holding a log like he'd wandered into a play halfway through the script, and Cheryl marched down off my porch like she was storming the Bastille. "Sir, step away from the materials," she barked. "This area is under HOA review. You're trespassing on land that affects our community." Jason leaned on the log pile, raised an eyebrow, and gave her that tired grin we use when we're trying not to laugh in somebody's face. "Ma'am." "No offense, but I'm pretty sure this is my buddy's dirt, my buddy's wood, and therefore my buddy's business," he said. "Your community is down the hill." That was when her hand went into her purse and everything inside me shifted gears. I've seen that movement too many times. Dark parking lots, bad apartments, situations where fear and ego mix with something metal. And my brain flipped from ticked-off homeowner into tactical officer, so fast my heart barely had time to catch up. "Cheryl, stop," I warned, stepping off the porch. "If that's a gun, do not pull it out." But she already had it. A little handgun, the kind sold in pastel colors in glass cases, and she was pointing it at Jason's chest with both hands. "Last warning," she said, voice shaking just enough to terrify me. "Step away. I will defend myself." Jason froze, hands up, log. Tumbling out of his grip. "Nobody's attacking you," I said, hands spread. "You walked up on us on my land. There is no threat here." She squeezed the trigger anyway. The shot cracked through the trees. Birds exploded out of the branches. Jason staggered like someone had punched him in the shoulder, dropped to one knee, his fingers coming away red where they grabbed his flannel, and he still tried to joke through his teeth. "I'm fine, man, just a scratch," even as his face went pale. I was at his side in 2 seconds, pressing his hand harder on the wound, scanning him like my training taught me, listening for a second shot that never came, smelling the burnt powder in the cold air. And with my free hand, I grabbed the radio hanging on a hook by the door, because the game had officially changed. "Redwood Dispatch. This is Cole," I said, voice dropping into that calm, flat tone we use when things are already bad. "Armed civilian just discharged a firearm and wounded a non-threatening subject on my private property location. High Ridge Trail East Spur. Roll deputies and EMS notify tactical of potential hostile group incoming from Cedar Crest And while I was saying that, I watched Cheryl's face, watched the realization start to creep in, watched her put together the vest hanging by my door, the radio, the way I talked to dispatch. "You're law enforcement," she stammered. "I don't just work there," I said. "I run the team." "You really don't want to meet today." And that was the first moment she actually looked unsure. Sirens started as a low whine on the far side of the ridge, then got louder as they took the switchbacks, and Jason, lying there with a medic glove pressed to his shoulder, muttered, "So much for a quiet Saturday." And yeah, that happened. 2 patrol trucks slid onto the packed dirt outside the cabin. Gravel shooting out from under the tires' doors popped open, and Deputy Riley jumped out, hand near her holster, until she saw me, Jason, and the gun still dangling in Cheryl's grip. "Ethan, please tell me this is just some stupid misunderstanding," she said, already knowing from my face that it wasn't, and I gave her the short version. While EMS started wrapping Jason's arm, Riley turned to Cheryl, who suddenly looked a lot smaller without the front door to lean on. "Ma'am, put the weapon on the ground and step back with your hands where I can see them," she ordered. "I was defending the neighborhood," Cheryl insisted, voice climbing back up into indignation. "They were breaking rules, being aggressive, building things. I warned them. I felt threatened. You shot a man stacking firewood. I said every word like a weight on land that is nowhere near your jurisdiction after you trespassed and called 911 with a story you made up." While that was going on, Riley's radio crackled. "Unit 12, be advised. Multiple subjects hiking up from Cedar Crest, identifying as HOA Board. Say they're coming to assist with enforcement." And I swear I actually laughed, that bitter kind of laugh you let out when the absurdity just reaches a new level. They came up the trail like a field trip, matching Cedar Crest jackets, clipboards clutched to their chests, phones held out, and recording. And at the front was this tall guy with a silver beard and the confident strut of somebody who's never actually been told. "I'm Douglas Pike, chairman of the Cedar Crest Board," he announced like Riley had asked. "This area is under association review. We'll need you officers to lower your weapons and vacate so we can complete our inspection." Riley just stared at him for a second, then said slowly like she was explaining gravity. "Sir, this is an active crime scene. One of your members just shot someone. You're all trespassing right now," and behind him, I heard one board member hiss, "I told you Cheryl goes too far," and another shoot back, "You loved her at the last election." That circus was still ramping up when the low rumble of our armored truck made its way up the spur road. Engine's deep presence, heavy. And when my team stepped out in full kit helmets, vests, weapons slung low. But ready, body cameras blinking. The power dynamic changed instantly. Clipboards and jackets didn't look like much authority standing in front of people who actually swear oaths under state law. Under that weight, Cheryl finally put the gun down. Riley cuffed her for everyone to see. EMS confirmed Jason's wound was a graze. Lucky by maybe half an inch, a neighbor from a trail spur came up, hands shaking, and quietly said, "I filmed everything from when she started yelling until the shot. They never touched her," and handed over her phone like it weighed 50 pounds. Fast forward a few hours, and we're all downtown in a conference room. Me, Riley, the district attorney, a county surveyor. That neighbor and a screen playing back the video, plus the 911 call transcript, and the county parcel map spread out on the table. And the DA is flipping through it all, listening to Cheryl's fake panic voice on the recording, watching her march across my yard on video while the surveyor points at bright lines on the map showing Cedar Crest's boundary, ending a good long way down the hill from my cabin, and the DA just shakes her head. They really tried to stretch HOA rules up a mountain they don't own, she says, then looks at me. Get me a warrant for their office, Ethan. Emails, meeting minutes, enforcement logs, fine ledgers. If this is a one-off, we'll deal with it. But I've got a feeling this isn't the first time they've used that clipboard like a weapon. Which is how we ended up back at that office where this story started, with my team serving a lawful search warrant, while the same people who love banging on doors and taping notices to other folks' houses suddenly got real precious about privacy. And as we went through their files, it stopped feeling like a weird one-day meltdown and started looking a lot like a pattern. Letters threatening to put liens on homes because kids left scooters in the yard. Fines for having the wrong color. Flower pot on a porch. Internal emails where board members joked about making life miserable for residents who pushed back. And then in a printed email thread between Douglas and Cheryl. There it was in black and white. That shack on the ridge is bad for values. He'd written, if his place is visible from Cedar Crest, it's our problem. Do what you need to do to bring him into line or convince him to move. Riley slid that printout in front of him, tapped the line with her finger, and asked very calmly, "This your idea of protecting the neighborhood, Mr. Pike?" And for the first time that day, he didn't have a speech ready to go. Finally, she turned back to Cheryl by the unplugged shredder, every eye in the room on them, and said loud and clear, "Cheryl Banks, you're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment, criminal trespass, and filing a false report to emergency services." And as the cuffs clicked shut around the same hands that had been waving violation notices in my face that morning, she sputtered, "You can't arrest me in front of the board. I was protecting our community." And Riley just shook her head and said, "No, you were terrorizing people with a gun and a rule book you don't have the authority to use like that." And we walked her out past a framed poster that said, "Cedar Crest Reserve. Protecting your quality of life," loaded her into the back of a patrol car. Door shut with that heavy sound. And I looked up toward the ridge where my little A-frame sat, trees, my deck, and pile of wood. But something had shifted inside me, and I realized this was the first time in a long time that someone like that tried to push me out of my own life and ended up being the one who had to leave instead. Here's what I want you to take from this. If you've made it this far with me, you don't have to run a SWAT team or have a badge to stand up for the line between community and control. Most of the time, it's not going to look like an armored truck rolling up to a glass office. It's going to look like knowing your rights, keeping copies of your paperwork, asking hard questions, refusing to let somebody else's title rewrite your boundaries. And yeah, sometimes you lose. Sometimes the board or the boss or the cop or the neighbor gets away with it longer than they should. But sometimes when you push back with the truth and the law instead of just anger, the story ends with the right person getting in the car. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think HOAs actually protect neighborhoods, or are they just giving certain personalities an excuse to bully people? Where would you draw the line between standards and straight-up harassment? And have you ever had your own Cheryl or Douglas in your life, in a job or a school or a family, who thought the rules only applied to everyone else? Drop your thoughts and your stories in the comments. Argue with me. Agree with me. Tell me what real justice would have looked like here in your eyes. And if you believe regular people pushing back still matters, hit like so. More folks see this. And maybe, just maybe, the next clipboard warrior thinks twice before turning their opinion into someone else's nightmare.